welcome to Disciple Dojo. I review a lot of study Bibles here. I review a lot of resources, commentaries, things like that from time to time. And in this episode, I want to just let you know about something I've been reading that I've wanted to read for a while. I listened to it on Audible about a year ago, but it's one of those works that, like audiobooks, I love audiobooks. I think they're great for listening to nonfiction or for novels or stories. But the downside to audiobooks is you can't immediately go back and reread a line or think through a line before moving on to the next one. Like, you just have to follow the narrator. And, you might think, oh, let me rewind that. But you don't get the full effect of seeing something on the page, maybe seeing the structure of it. And you also don't get the benefit of footnotes. So I'm a big fan of audiobooks in general, but not all the time. So anyway, the book that I listened to on Audible was Dante, and particularly the Divine Comedy. It's a classic work written in all the way back in the 1300s in Italy. And like a lot of ancient work, it's written in poetry, in verse, rather than like what we think of as modern nonfiction paragraph format. And it also involves a lot of, at the time, current events or people who were known that in our day and age, centuries later, we don't know who they are off the top of our head. So there's a real challenge when you're trying to read Dante's Divine Comedy. And I listened to it on Audible and I thought, I just barely scratched the surface. I kind of have an idea of what it's about after listening to it, but I missed a whole lot. So I need to actually read it. And so a couple of years ago, I was at Barnes & Noble, and they had a copy of the Inferno. Now, the Divine Comedy is three parts: the Inferno, the Purgatorio, and Paradiso. So basically hell, purgatory, heaven. So this is the first part of it, Inferno. And I started reading this, but I didn't make it very far. I'll show you why, and then I'll show you what I think is a much more promising version of the Divine Comedy. And so before we jump into those, just a reminder, if you haven't already, I'd love for you to subscribe, help us continue to grow the channel. And when you do, of course, click the notifications. As always, that is just the best way to help grow this channel. So this is the version I picked up. It's by Fall River Press. You see a lot of their stuff at Barnes & Noble. It's cheap. It's mass produced. And by cheap, I mean it's very affordable. So you'll see it kind of on their table of classics, usually over by the cafe or something, at least if you're in any Barnes & Noble I've been to. And it's the illustrated edition. So that caught my eye. I love like Gustave Doré type engravings, woodcuts, lithographs. And so this one has some really cool ones. Just the art is what pulled me into it. And this is just the Inferno. It's not Paradiso. It's not Purgatorio. It's just the Inferno. So you're only getting a third of the Divine Comedy, which is one thing to know, and one of the reasons that I ended up putting this aside. So it lays out all of the cantos that make up the first volume. And this is, a lot of kids in high school, they had to read Dante's Inferno. Inferno is the most well-known of the three because it has the most vivid imagery. So you got a nice sketch of Dante Alighieri, and then some Doré woodcuts. This is a painting from Canto 3. And then you have the canto. It's laid out. It's laid out in verses. This is poetry, so it gives you a running count of the lines. And you have the illustrations that kind of go along with it. So this is the famous opening line of the Inferno. And then this is how it begins. So I loved the illustrations to this. And I actually liked the way this was laid out. If I were going to take notes and things, this would be very helpful, just like a good study Bible. So what was the problem with this? Well, the main problem was I don't know enough about Dante or Italy in the 13th and 14th centuries to know all of the references that are in here. The pictures are fantastic, and if I already knew the story, the plot, this would be really cool. Being able to read and have the Doré woodcuts. Like, I want to emphasize, I'm a big fan of the visuals and how this is laid out. This is not bad quality, and it's all throughout. Like, you can see how many illustrations there are throughout the text, including some that are double page full color. And that makes sense because this is one of the most famous works of literature of all time. And this fueled the imaginations of so many Renaissance artists. It's vivid, it's descriptive, it lends itself well to artistic interpretation, more so than most other literature of the ancient world because of how vivid it is. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is there are no notes, and I can't track with what's going on. The translation itself, it's okay, but translating poetry from one language into another obviously is going to be a challenge. So what I needed was something that is more than just the text, even if it's got some great Gustave Doré artwork to go with it. And so that's why when I was at the same bookstore last week, I picked up the Everyman's Library version of the Divine Comedy. And I absolutely love this edition. And I'll show you why. Check out the dust jacket. Like with or without the dust jacket, it looks great sitting on the shelf. Like this looks like an important book. It introduces you to the Divine Comedy. It's got a bibliography if you want to know more. Then it gives a chronology of Dante's life as well as cultural things going on during his life. So you got what he's doing, and then you have what's going on in the world around him. Incredibly helpful for understanding the book. And it's pretty extensive, all the way up to his death in 1321. So then you begin the Divine Comedy, and then the first part, Inferno, Canto 1. And it gives a brief description. The illustrated does as well, but this gives a brief description of what happens in each canto. So you know, okay, this is what's going to happen in this canto. And as you're reading through, it starts to make more sense. And the translation, it preserves the poetry, but it's a little more readable, I think. So let me just compare the two so you can see. Here is the Fall River version, the illustrated edition. Listen to how it reads. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward path had been lost. Ah me, how hard a thing it is to say. What was this forest savage, rough and stern, which in the very thought renews the fear? So bitter it is, death is little more. But of the good to treat which I there found, speak will I of the other things I saw there. I cannot well repeat how there I entered, so full was I of slumber at the moment in which I had abandoned the true way. But after I had reached a mountain's foot, at that point where the valley terminated, which had with consternation pierced my heart, upward I looked, and I beheld its shoulders vested already with that planet's rays, which leadeth others right by every road. Then was the fear a little quieted that in my heart's lake had endured throughout the night which I had passed so piteously. So that's the first 20 lines or so in this edition. Now I'm going to read the same few lines, but we're going to read them in the Everyman edition. When I had journeyed half of our life's way, I found myself within a shadowed forest, for I had lost the path that does not stray. Ah, it is hard to speak of what it was, that savage forest, dense and difficult, which even in recall renews my fear. So bitter, death is hardly more severe. But to retell the good discovered there, I'll also tell the other things I saw. I cannot clearly say how I entered the wood. I was so full of sleep just at the point where I had abandoned the true path. But when I'd reached the bottom of a hill, it rose along the boundary of the valley that had harassed my heart with so much fear. I looked on high and saw its shoulders clothed already by the rays of that same planet which serves to lead men straight along all roads. At this my fear was somewhat quieted, for through the night of sorrow I had spent, the lake within my heart felt terror present. So this to me is a more readable translation. I can follow the train of thought easier. The imagery makes more sense. The language is not as wooden or as non-English sounding. And again, we're reading a translation. This was originally all in Italian. It tried to provide a little bit of the rhyme or some of the feel of the original, even though you can't do that completely from one language to another. So this already, I was understanding more of what I was reading. There is some illustration. This is not Gustave Doré's Dante's Inferno, but this is some illustration. In this case, this is a line drawing, and it doesn't say who it's by. There's probably credit somewhere in the back. It continues on, and then you come to Canto 2. Now, also, you have plenty of space to write notes in the margin, like I did right here. It's laid out clean. It's easy to follow. But here's the thing that makes this version so much more helpful. In the back, you have some more illustrations. Again, not nearly as skillful, as vivid as those by Doré. But at the end, and remember again, this is Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso, all 3 volumes. At the end of those, you have notes. And these notes go through and they tell you what these phrases are referring to. So like when we read at the beginning and he said, I had gone half our life's journey. It says, midway along the road of the human lifespan of 70 years. And that's pulling from the Psalms. Whenever it's a biblical reference, it'll put it in brackets here. Dante's journey through the afterlife is set in the 1300s, his own 35th year. In the middle of my days, I shall go to the gates of hell. And then he talks about, it terrifying even to recall it. There's a note here in line 6 in recall. In remembering what occurred. In the fiction of the poem, Dante, the I, is both the traveler through the afterlife in the 1300s and the poet who later, after his return to this life, describes his journey from memory. Then line 17, it talks about when the rays of that same planet had clothed the hills. That same planet, the sun, the fourth of the planets revolving around the earth in Ptolemaic astronomy. Often used as a symbol of God and divine light and grace, here it represents the guidance from above along the true upward path, the hill. And then later in that same canto, Dante is going to encounter a leopard, a lion, and a she-wolf. And so there will be notes here. Line 32, a leopard, usually interpreted as a symbol of lust. The 3 beasts which attack Dante are the same as those sent to punish the sinful leaders of the people in Jeremiah. Line 45, a lion, usually interpreted as a symbol of pride. Line 49, a she-wolf, a symbol of avarice, and particularly avarice in the church, since a statue of the she-wolf which suckled Rome's founders, Romulus and Remus, then stood outside the papal palace of the Lateran in Rome. For Dante, greed for money, land, power, and authority was the enemy of love and justice and the main cause of corruption in the church and in society as a whole. For cupidity is the root of all evils, 1 Timothy. So I would never have known that there's a statue of Romulus and Remus suckling at the she-wolf that was outside of the papal palace in Rome in the 1300s. I would not have known that. So that little piece of background information really helps me understand better what Dante is trying to say in this world that he's creating that I would have just completely glossed over in the illustrated edition. And later in the canto, Dante is going to meet Virgil, the Roman poet who wrote the Aeneid, and he'll be described as one who seemed faint in line 63. It says, Virgil, the Roman poet, whose voice is faint because of the many centuries between him and Dante. Virgil died before the time of Jesus. So these notes, and I mean, this is just the notes for Canto 1 are 1, 2, 3, 4, almost 4 pages just for that first canto. And then it moves into Canto 2, gives the background, Canto 3, Canto 4. And you can see I've been highlighting quite a bit in this because this is all stuff that I may have known or maybe not have connected the dots, but most of it honestly is stuff I didn't know. So the Everyman edition comes with a ribbon bookmark, and honestly I wish it came with 2, but I'm just using the 1 bookmark to do double duty. So I'm on Canto 5 right now, so I've got this marked with this bookmark, and then here are the notes for Canto 5. So I just put it here to keep my place. It would have been helpful if the notes for each canto, and these notes are so good, if these notes would have actually been maybe on the page like a study Bible, that would have keep from having to flip back and forth. But I also understand some people when they want to read Dante not for study, but they're very familiar with Dante. They want to read it just for enjoyment. So I get why you might want to have it uninterrupted on the page, and having some illustrations is nice as well. I understand why it might be hard to put the study notes there, but just the study nerd in me wishes that, I didn't have to keep flipping back and forth. However, what I've been doing is I alternated. One time I read the canto first, and then I went and read the notes and that kind of oh yeah, that's what that meant. Then with another of the cantos I tried, I think it was Canto 2, I was like, let me read the notes first so that I have the background imagery and the vocabulary. I'm getting the references that he's making. So I read all the notes first. Then I went back and read the canto, and it made more sense. I don't know which approach I prefer, and I might just keep alternating between those. But the cool thing is, this is my nightly Like before bed, I'll read one canto. They're not very long. They're only a couple of pages at most. So I can read a canto and then I can flip back and I can read the notes for that canto or vice versa. And so that's like this become this little nightly ritual before I go to bed. So why does a channel that focuses on Bible teaching and study Bible reviews and biblical scholarship and that, why bother talking about and recommending Dante's Divine Comedy? First of all, because this is a work that has shaped all of Western culture. Even among Christians, a lot of the ideas we have about heaven and hell and the concept of purgatory, like my Catholic friend, Dr. Matthew Thomas, he was just on like a little over a week ago where we talked about purgatory. Well, there's a whole middle section of the Divine Comedy is about purgatory. And in this, you see Dante giving either his view or maybe critiquing the official view. I don't know enough about Dante to know when he's being satirical or when he's meant to be criticizing what he's depicting. But you get a lot of what the popular views of heaven, purgatory, and hell were for centuries. I mean, this is before the Reformation. So before Martin Luther, this is kind of representing what all of European Christendom, at least, thought about, or the way that they thought about things of eternal value. The questions they had. What about the people who died before ever hearing the gospel, along with the souls of all of those who died unbaptized, but were generally good people? Like, what about that? They're some of the first people he meets when he goes into what's called limbo. You don't have to agree with Dante's theology. You don't have to agree with Catholic theology or Protestant theology. You don't have to agree with any particular view of heaven, hell, the afterlife, what we call personal eschatology, in order to find something to think about that makes you grapple with these issues that are eternal in nature. That's what good literature does. Good literature makes you use your mental, intellectual, even your spiritual muscles as you wrestle with it. So I wanted to read the Divine Comedy. This may turn out to be a book I have to kind of power through at the end. I don't know. The first few cantos have been very engaging, and they weren't engaging when I first tried it in the illustrated edition. The artwork in this was engaging, but the reading itself was not. And I ended up putting it down for like a year. And then I came across this edition. This is doing for me what I needed from the other one. I just wish I could put the illustrations from that one into this one. That would be the perfect edition, but what can you do? So anyway, if you're looking to read the Divine Comedy, you've never read it, or maybe you had to read it back in high school when you were like just a teenager that could not care less about 1300s Italian poetry. I get it. I understand that. It may be worth picking back up. That's what I'm doing. That's why I'm reading this now as a mid-40s Bible nerd. And what I found is because I have now decades of biblical knowledge that I didn't have when I was first exposed to this, my appreciation for this, my ability to engage with it is much greater now as a result. So I'm really enjoying, I'm very much enjoying reading through this. I love the size. This is compact enough. The notes are, again, I can't tell you how crucial the notes are. And the translation, this is translated by Alan Mendelbaum, so maybe you can look it up that way. But again, it's in the Everyman's library. They have other classic books as well. I just haven't looked into them, but I'm going to see what other titles are in the Everyman's library and probably make those at least my initial go-to for other books that I want to read. I've never read the Aeneid. I've read the Iliad, I've read the Odyssey, I've read Ovid's Metamorphoses, but I've never read Virgil's Aeneid. So that's going to be what I read next after this. And I'm hoping that there's an Everyman's volume. I don't know. I probably should have looked before I made this video, but I'm going to find a readable version of the Aeneid. And then that will be the next thing that I read after this. So I just want to share that because I think it's important that we as Christians, and I'm speaking to those of us that are Christians, especially those that consider yourself Bible-based Christians, I think it's absolutely crucial to read more than the Bible. John Wesley, founder of Methodism, famously described himself as a man of one book. Everything he did was infused with Scripture. But if you go back and look at John Wesley's, his requirements for Methodist preachers, as well as his own understanding, his own reading habits, he read voraciously from the classics. He wrote grammars on Greek and Hebrew and Latin. He even wrote a treatise on electricity. And this was back in the 1700s when electricity was like the new thing in the world. And Benjamin Franklin was doing stuff with keys and kites and everything. So the reason that just, to me, I've always appreciated that John Wesley could call himself a man of one book and all of his preaching just totally infused with scripture. And yet that did not mean that he didn't read widely from the surrounding culture of his own day, as well as the classics going all the way back to Homer and ancient literature that he could get his hands on. And I think that's a great example. I think we should do that. You know, in the New Testament, Paul, when he goes and preaches, do this. If you want an exercise that'll kind of stretch you a little bit, get a good Bible background commentary or a good study Bible. Find every place in the New Testament where Paul directly cites or alludes to a pagan author. You will be surprised how many times he does that, whether it's Aratus, Epimenides, Epictetus. Paul cited pagan poets, which means Paul read pagan poets. Paul would have had familiarity with what the people in his Greco-Roman world that he traveled through were reading. And he did that as a Pharisee of Pharisees, an expert in the Hebrew Bible, someone who had the Hebrew scriptures memorized, and that was the world he lived in. And yet when he found himself in Athens, when he found himself writing to Titus, when he found himself speaking in his letters to various congregations, he could pull in concepts and quotes and allusions from writers that were popular in that day outside of biblical culture. So if it's good enough for John Wesley, if it's good enough for the Apostle Paul, I think it's good enough for me. And that's one of the reasons that I read classics alongside of biblical texts and resources. And I recommend Dojo viewers do the same as well. So I hope this is helpful. There are other editions of other books out there that I found really helpful. And if you're interested, I mean, this is not what this channel is about, but I think it's worth at least touching on from time to time. If this interests you and it's something you'd like to see more of, let me know in the comment section below. This channel exists to help, equip, engage, empower, like giving people what they need to help them grow in their faith. And I think part of that is exposing ourselves to a wide range of literature, whether it's modern mythology and modern literature like superhero stuff or Tolkien or C.S. Lewis, or whether it's ancient stuff like Virgil, Dante, Milton. We've talked about Milton here before on the channel. Just being able to engage with the world that we find ourselves in, seeing fingerprints of God in the classic literature that people have created over the centuries. All of that, I think, is a part of discipleship. So maybe this will encourage some of you to kind of dip your toe into that world a little bit more. And by the way, I'll recommend another channel. This is not, I don't know his religious views. I don't know whether he would appreciate what we do here at Disciple Dojo or not, but I do want to give a shout out to this channel, Benjamin McAvoy. He's a British literature teacher. I think he's over at one of the, Oxford, Cambridge, one of those. And he has something called the Hardcore Literature Club. But his videos are super simple, and he just talks about specific works of literature. He's got this one right here, How to Read Dante's Inferno. It's about an hour long. I watched this a couple of years ago. It's very, very good, very helpful. And he is somebody who has inspired me to read more. He's got one here on Paradise Lost. He was the one that inspired me to pick up Les Mis and read that massive work. I read it over the course of a year. It absolutely blew me away. And I wouldn't have appreciated it to the degree I had before watching, his episode on it. So I don't know, Benjamin McAvoy. It'd be fun to hang out with him in a pub somewhere over there and talk about C.S. Lewis and things like that. But anyway, I just wanted to point viewers to his channel because it's very helpful. So go give him a follow. I mean, he's got 150,000 subscribers, so it's not like he's hurting for an audience, but this is really, really good content. So anyway, I hope some of this is helpful. Just keep reading, keep growing, keep learning, and be on the lookout for places in the world where you see these kind of echoes of God's truth reverberating throughout. Like Paul at Mars Hill, we can find elements of truth everywhere we look. And our job as followers of Jesus is to bridge that gap between the God who created, sustains, and has gifted this world with such incredible beauty and those in the world who need to be introduced to that same God. Anyway, that'll do it for now. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If any of this interests you, or if you're like, no, get back to reviewing study Bibles and talking about ancient Near East background. That's definitely more my wheelhouse than 14th century Italian literature, that's for sure. But thanks for watching. We'll see you back here next time at Disciple Dojo. As always, in the meantime, keep training.